Hello, my name is Mike Connolly, and I represent the Maine Irish Heritage Centre, and we're here at the Portland Media Centre for both organizations, and we're filming today on the program The Heart of Maine. And today we're very, very fortunate to have with us somebody from County Galway. This is Cóilín Hernon. We'd like to say Céad Míle Fáilte Cóilín to Fáilte Róca G Portland.
And thanks very much for inviting me here and taking part in this. I'm having a great time with Mike and Becky here in Portland. It's my first visit to Portland, even though we talked about it, Mary and I talked about it for years, even before COVID came in. We were talking about coming to Portland because we would have been familiar with you and your writings and that, but we're here and we're going to talk.
We're here and we're going to keep you here as long as we can. Cóilín, where were you born and what are your earliest memories?
I was born in a townland near Carna called Rusheenamanagh. Now, where did the name come from, I don't know. I'm not an expert on place names or that, but Rusheen is a piece of land. We kind of Rusheenamanagh, Rusheenamanagh, a lot of names like that with Rusheen, but Rusheenamanagh, the older folk at home would say that there was a monastery there one time, and it's the Monach, or the Rusheenamanagh, and it's written now as Rusheenamanagh. So it's, I don't know, and I didn't really spend, I think when it was probably called Rusheenamanagh, there was a very good reason at the time.
Was Monach monks?
The Monach was a monk, yes.
So there might have been a small
There might
monastery.
have been a small, well that is, but we never came across any evidence of that there, even though there was a convent there. Mercy nuns came to Rusheenamanagh in 1872, and they finished up in the 1970s, I think it's 1974 they finished up in Carna. But other than that, we had no evidence of monks being in the locality at all.
And you've seen already a lot of evidence of the Sisters of Mercy here in Portland.
I have, yes, indeed. I have,
the
yes.
Mercy Hospital, and then St. Joseph's College, and then out to Calvary that we'll talk about later.
Yes, yeah.
Tell us about the old folks that you remember from Rusheen. What were they like, and what were the stories that they had?
Yeah, I suppose I'd start off by saying that I was very lucky to be born in the 50s. The reason I'm saying that is because a lot of the folklorists were alive and well and healthy. Like in our own townland, we had a famous, I didn't meet him now, Michael Connolly, and he gave a lot of local history to Sean Ford, who was a local judge in the circuit courts in Carna, and he would come to Carna once a month and he would gather all the historians from Ard, which had great historians, Ard West, and Carna, Myris, Rusheenamanagh, Connemara, and all of that. But for me in Rusheenamanagh, there was one man there, Coleman Ridge. We used to call him Cóil Beag. It's not because he was small that he was called Cóil Beag, but his father was also Cóilín, so he was called then Cóilín Beag or Cóil Beag, and he was a very good historian. Generally, he was good on a lot of families. Joe Gorham would have been good. Joe Fadid Hidoch, we'd call him in Rusheenamanagh. He was good, but he was very good on Gorham's connection. He was very interested in that, but he was still, overall, he was a very good historian. And our neighbouring townland, which I used to visit regularly in Calafinish, where my great-grandmother, Bridget Mulcairns, who happens to be related to you, Mike, so we are, 21st cousin, somewhere down the line there, cousins. And there was a Patrick Mulcairns, Pateen Tamwy, Fatsa, we used to call him Patrick Mulcairns. And my father used to work on the house for him doing extensions and that. And one day my father said to me, I think he said somebody should sit down with Pateen Tamwy and write down, there was no recording as such available at the time, write down some of the history, especially, he said, the history of the Calafinish, he said, because they're impossible to sort out, he said, because they all intermarried each other. Gorham's married Mulcairns, Mulcairns married Gorham, though they were intermarried. So I started off with Pateen Tamwy really But I was more interested in the Califinish connection because they were so intricate and to work, they were difficult to work out. Some of them would be first cousin once removed, or second cousin and first cousin once removed, and so on. So I was lucky that way when I started out. And then probably townlands around Rusheenamanagh also would have great historians, like in Ard West there was he only died maybe 7 or 8, 5 or 6 years ago, Cóilín Cóilín Vartla. He was renowned folklorist back there. He had
so you
very,
had a
very
treasure
good
of people that you could...
Yes, there
and
was.
Not just people with histories, but sean singers?
Yes, there was the singing, the dance. I wasn't into the music or the singing as much. My brothers were taking care of that, so I left that to them.
Maybe you should tell about especially your two brothers that are into the music.
Yeah, I have two brothers, PJ and Marcus, and they spent a lifetime with Irish music, but I didn't have that. I had other interests and other gifts. When I started out in school, probably 15, 16 years of age, I started rowing. I had a rowing team, Corach Rowing. That's Corach at the regattas, local regattas from Kilkerran, Roundstone, Weenish, McDarras, Lettermullen, all those. So, and then after many years and I had some great teams, I was always very lucky that I always had good rowers with me. I started off in Rusheenamanagh, we had a team called Rusheenamanagh, and there were two brothers, Pádraig de Búrca and Jamie, his brother. Now both of them have passed away now, and then after that I had my brother Michael, who passed away in 82, and Michael Welsh. So I was lucky all the time, I think, that I had good oarsmen with me in the rowing. So I would have a huge interest in that. And then of course rowing demands a lot of training. You have to put the hours in, and then as I became a little bit lazier, I decided my next hobby would have to be sailing, because my mother came from Feenish Island and they spent their lifetime sailing and arguing and sailing again and drinking, and that's something that everybody did at the time. So I bought a boat in 1972, the year I did my leaving cert in Carna. I bought a boat from a guy in Dublin, and the boat was owned by my grandfather, Patrick Madden, on Feenish Island. The boat was built in 1916, and it was at the time it was rigged as a púcán. That was two sails, the mainsail and a jib. And in latter years then, in the 50s, it was in Roundstone on Inishliacan, where, remember we were talking about Val Green and the McDonoughs and those, and the Greens in Inishliacan. That's where she was working for a while, and she was owned by a guy in Roundstone in the 50s. And he had a contract with the Department of Education, and he was taking children from Inishliacan Island, because the school had been closed many years before that, out to Roundstone, to the National School in Roundstone, and then he'd bring them back home again in the evening. And in 1992, the first year I went to the Roundstone Regatta with my boat, with my glóteog, this guy came down to me at the pier and he looked down, he pointed at the boat, he said, "Cóilín," he said, "that's my old school bus." And that made my day in Roundstone.
Oh my goodness.
That was my day.
Well, Cóilín, I'm going to take you back again to your early days. And did you have electricity in your house when you were first born, or when did it come? When did it arrive?
Yeah, it arrived in 1958. It arrived. I've no great memory before that. I was a couple of years old. I was born in 1952, so I was 6 years old, but I don't really have any great memory. I do have a small memory of what they call the tilly lamp up on the wall at home, and then when they wanted to look at something closely, they turn up the wick a bit and, make the light brighter and bigger and so on. But other than that, no, I don't. But I know that it changed really for us and for everybody when the electricity came, because now they could have a light in all the rooms, which was great, just to switch on and off. Before that, you had a candle, so you brought your candle with you, and you made sure before you fell asleep, that you that you turned it off.
Yes, I remember at Christmas time the candles in the windows.
The windows, yeah.
It's just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
But the electricity changed things a little bit, and then other things that changed them were appliances, getting appliances into the house.
Yeah, mainly now the appliances would be the radio, the next one, because people had small little, what they used to call transistors, and they were batteries, dry batteries. And the batteries, then the radio would only go on when there was the news on, or Irish music, Ciaran Mac Mahona, something like that. So the radio wasn't on all day like now. They had to preserve the battery power.
Was Radio na Gaeltacht on in those early days?
No, there wasn't. No, it was many years. It was into the 80s before Radio, the 70s that Radio na Gaeltacht started. So it was RTE.
Was there much Irish language content in the early days?
No, there wouldn't be a lot of Irish content, except the Irish music really would be our interest. And I think a lot of people, especially in our house where there was an interest in music, the Irish music was a big thing. So that brought, and then after the radio, I'd say came the things like the electric kettle, electric iron. Gradually, it was many years before the likes of the washing machine or the tumble dryer or the dishwasher. That was many, many years. That was into the 1980s or that before they
Did
came
your
on.
house in the early days have a bathroom interior?
Yeah, we had a bathroom built in 1960 because there was a big freeze up in 1961. And it went on from nearly Christmas to nearly St. Patrick's Day. I remember bits of it, and all the pipes froze from the frost. And some of them then, because they were type of plastic, what we used to call WAVN pipes, they would burst then, so it'd have to be repaired and so on. So I have good memories of all of that. And then we had a storage tank. There was no piped water running along that you piped into. You built a big tank, and you filled that with the water off the roof of the house into that. And then we'd have to go out and pump. There was a pump that went around like this handle, and you pumped the water into the little tank, and that went into the system. There was a boiler in the back of the range, so we would have hot and cold water.
Was it?
A back boiler was it? Yes, it was. Yeah.
Very good invention, I think.
It was, yeah, it was. Especially when there were children in houses for hot water. Yeah.
Yeah. It's often been said that the most important export from Ireland has been its people. And it's a sad thing, isn't it? The number of people who have emigrated over the years, especially from the parts of Ireland that you come from. In your own family, did you lose some of your siblings? And what was it like when people left and emigrated? Because sometimes they were destined never to come back.
Yeah, I suppose there wasn't, in my time now, only one of my siblings went to England for a while and so on. But I know that in my father's time now and my mother's time, it was a big thing. And I suppose most households that time had big families. And the holding was only capable of supporting one or two people. So the rest just went. And especially the older ones, boys and girls, they were expected to go, and they were expected to send back the passage for the next child to go and to support. I had an aunt, my father's grandaunt, she was Mary Hernon. She was brought to America as a child sometime in the 1870s with the Mulcairnses. And when she died in 1896, my father used to say that they were very upset at home because she had paid the rent every year from America. And that was the end of that when she died. She wasn't married. She died and she's buried in Boston. And so it was the same for most families back there. So they were, I think they were so used to it. The whole idea was that people would get up when they were old enough, they would just get up and go and try and bring some of the rest out, and then help out with, especially Christmas. The dollars would come, the parcels would come, and they were appreciated. They were appreciated.
Do you remember the route that people would take to emigrate? Where did they go to emigrate?
Well, I suppose in the earlier years, for example, one of your relations in Califinish, we were talking about it the other day, Cat Viog, Cat Connolly, Cat Vicky from Califinish. She used to tell my father that she went to America on a sailing ship called the Lordine. Now, I never came across that name, but I'm sure it was there. And how she boarded the ship going to America was the ship would leave Galway City, Galway town, and sail out along the west coast past Spiddle, past Carrow, and come off round outside Moynish or Feenish or those off Carna there, and would anchor there. And the locals then, when their little boats, would bring out whoever was going to America, and they would board the ship there. There was another ship that was going to America called the Cóilín. So like I said, that's an Irish name, so I don't know is it a translation. But Catavug used to tell my father that she went to America. She stayed there for a number of years, and she came back again to Califinish to marry in Califinish. But as time went on, then things changed, and in the 50s, well into the 50s, and that still some of the liners would be coming to Galway, but by and large the aeroplanes had taken over at this stage, and the journey was much shorter and quicker.
And my closest relative, when I first went over there, Babe Catha, actually spent 7 years in Boston and Portland, way back in the beginning of the 20th century,
right,
and came back to take care of her mother, and then hardly ever left the parish after that. I don't even think she went into Galway City after that.
That would be for a lot of people the same thing. Yes. A lot of people. It was a big day for them to go to Galway. And that stage, if you're talking around the 1900s, early 1900s, they would either get by boat into Galway, or when the railway station started, they would have to walk from Carna about 6 or 7 miles to Recess to get the train to go into Galway and back again. So it meant a lot of walking either way for them, yes.
Now, was there a fair day for you?
Our fair day was in Kilkerran, and it was a fair day every Monday of the month. First Monday of the month generally was a fair day in Kilkerran. That was the fair day. The nearest one to us then there was one in Cashel, but we never really frequented that. Now I don't know, was it to do that it was quite English speaking Cashel, and that I don't know. Kilkerran was much closer to us anyhow, so that was and of course the 9th of September then is the feast day of Saint Kieran, Wall Kieran, and that was a big day always in Kilkerran.
Yes.
You know.
Let's talk about things like that then, holidays, and maybe let's try to do them in some kind of an order. Holy days, I suppose, is what we call holidays today.
Okay.
And sometimes they have a religious background, but sometimes they don't.
They don't. Yeah.
Let's start off with the famous one, Láil of Ríd.
Oh, Láil of Ríd, yeah. That was the 1st of February. And at home they used to say that there was a 1 hour stretch on Láil of Ríd, a 1 hour stretch on the day, on St. Bridget's Day. And of course it was the start of the spring and all of that, and people would be prepare for the sowing of the potatoes and that by cutting seaweed for the land to fertilise the land and that. So that was Láil of Ríd. But other than that, and there wasn't a whole lot to it other than that people would note it. They would know their special days like that, like Láil of Ríd. Yeah, that was the start. And then of course after that probably came St. Patrick's Day, and that always came in the middle of Lent, but they were allowed to have a drink on St. Patrick's Day, of course, because
Patrick allowed it
Patrick
himself,
allowed,
right?
He did, yes. Yeah, he did. So that was a special day as well, that people would always dress up and put on their shamrock and all of that.
They always said about St. Patrick was that he was different from some of the other missionaries in that he tried to incorporate some of the Irish traditions into Christianity, not to replace them.
Not to replace them, yeah.
But to join them together.
Yeah, they used to say that, and that some of the wells were originally pagan wells, but that he christened them or brought them into the faith for us. And so it's all history. it's all history.
And then we come up to Bealtaine.
Bealtaine was an interesting day, Láil Bealtaine, the 1st of May, and it was quite a superstitious day at home. That's the only time I would ever hear any mention of Pishrogi. Pishrogi is the Irish for superstition. And for example, people, if you were giving milk to your neighbour, well, you didn't give milk on May Day, because people had this idea that they were going to take the milk from the cow from there on if you gave them milk that day. And that to me is a load of nonsense, but of course it has a deeper meaning, being the 1st of May at home now. It was the day that the rent was paid to the landlord. And the landlord's rule was no live animal on the premises. Even the cat wasn't allowed to stay in the house. So what the families had to do was take the fire and build it out outside the house on a little raised piece of ground. Put your fire out there, and the landlord and his agents would come around, and you'd pay your money, and you were allowed in. That was it. You were allowed to put your fire back in again. But it didn't always work that way, because if you had quite a good holding and somebody had a word in the ear of the landlord and said, I think I could do well in that holding there, then the landlord would come around and say to you, I don't want your money, I don't want your rent. You know, that's it. So you were on the road. You were just to walk along, get friends or neighbours or relations to take you in and start all over again. So it wasn't really a nice time for people, but that was the law of the land. It wasn't.
Had evictions stopped entirely by the time you were?
Oh, they were, yeah. It was well, I think the evictions were over, say, once the English government finished up, and once the treaty came in 1922, right. all of that really finished up at that stage, yes.
Well, we go forward to June then, and did you ever experience any of the bonfires?
Yes, we always had, I think, St. John's, Láil St. Sean, 23rd of June, I think, was Íl St. Sean. So we'd always light a bonfire, and they had superstition about that as well, in that I remember at home they would take a splank. Now, a splank is a live cinder, a piece of the fire, and they would take it with them with the tongs and throw it into the potato field. Yeah, just to make sure that the potatoes, they have a good season, and the potatoes, yeah. But little things, but harmless stuff in a way. Yes. I mean, people sometimes talk about superstitions and they fear, the amount of fear about them or something. But no, I never saw anything. I always saw something that it was, what's wrong with it anyhow? It's just a habit, maybe, rather than a superstition.
And if it wasn't done and something bad happened.
Well then, yeah, that's it, yeah.
So I guess then we come up to the one that's really local to Rusheen and Calafinish, Féile Victara.
Féile Victara, yeah, that was the 16th of July that was always celebrated. And that was unique because there was a church oratory, a little church or oratory on the island. And in my time, up to the 1970s, the stone roof had fallen in, but then the Office of Public Works repaired, but the roof, all the stones had fallen inside into the church, so they put it back together again. So you see it now as it was when it was built in the 5th century, according to some authority, and some of them say it's much later, that it's 11th or 12th century. I'm not an expert on that stuff. I'm not an archaeologist, so I don't know. I like the idea of the 6th century. I think it has to be.
Well, you're our local expert here, so we'll take whatever you say today.
I'd stick with 6th or 7th century. I think MacDara's would have been around at that stage.
Is the tradition still ongoing with sailing boats coming by Ilan Victara?
Yes, we still, and at the regattas, we go there to the regattas there. They organise a regatta there, the local committee, and one of them is the sailing boats to sail around the island. That is part of the tradition.
And sometimes to lower.
Yeah, well, that was, people still do it actually. They have a saying in Irish, "No díon gnás, agus no brish gnás." Don't make any new habit, or don't break any old habit, or whatever, something. Stick with what's there. Right. Leave it alone and just carry on.
And that was done for years, the lowering of the sails.
Yes, yeah.
Then you were very close to Kilkieran, and there was a law Kieran in September?
9th of September, yes, yeah.
And there was a holy well there, I know that.
There is a holy well there, yes, and that now in the last number of years, I'd say in the last, I don't know, Kilkerran people might correct me now on this, but definitely in the last 25, 30 years, they have a mass where St. Kieran, where his well and where he's supposed to be buried above the cemetery in Kilkerran, up at the top of the cemetery there. And they have a mass there now in the open air, unless the day is very wet or something. Right. They would go to the church in Kilkieran, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, we're getting closer to the end of the year in the Christian calendar, but the beginning of the year in the Celtic calendar, the first day of the year, and the night before that.
Yes. So
Samhain and Iha Haon. What were the traditions that you remember from those days?
We'd always have some games, small little games, like hanging the apple from the ceiling and on a string, and on your own trying to bite that. And putting your coin into a basin of water and diving in to take it out with your lips, with your mouth and stuff like that. I'd remember that now when we're growing up, but a lot of that disappeared then. I think as we grew older, of course, we grew out of a lot of that stuff, really.
But it was very dark at that time of the year, wasn't it? It was like the darkest time of the year.
Yes.
The winter comes earlier then. So. Do you think that some of the traditions that we now call Halloween, about the ghosts and the goblins, might have originated from the Celtic traditions?
Oh, probably did come down from there, yes. Yeah, probably did, yeah.
The idea that you might be able to communicate with past generations and all.
But as young people, you wouldn't see that. I was more interested in getting the money out of the basin.
I hope you succeeded sometime. So we're to the end of the year then, and you have the Christmas and Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
And then the day afterwards.
The day, well, yes. hIarnáin was a big event. hIarnáin, that was the night of the 24th of December, the evening before Christmas Day. And then, of course, on the following day was Lóin, Wren Day, the day of St. Stephen's Day, they call it. I think in English now I see it as Boxing Day, wherever that term came from, but Lóin. So we'd always go out on Christmas Day in the evening and try and catch a wren, put him into a jar, and walk around, and it was lucrative. It was worth the effort, really, because we'd walk around different houses and you'd get your money. You were happy out. If there was two of us together, you'd split the taking, and
the proceeds.
Was the proceeds. Yes, yeah, Lóin, yeah. But I think that has disappeared now. Has disappeared in the sense.
Did you ever see the Wren Boys? Were there ever any Wren Boys?
No, not in our. I know now it happened in other areas, like in Kerry and places. But in Carna, they weren't really. We were the Wren Boys, children who went out with the wren, and some houses would not be interested in giving you any money unless you had a wren. And then some people used to get a little potato and dress it up, put a little red beak on it, and put it into a jar, but make sure the jar was a bit dirty. And you say, "Oh, I have a wren here. Look at it in there." And then you shake the jar, because they wouldn't give you money. Well, not that they wouldn't, but they'd always say, "Well, Jolínad, do you have a wren?"
Yeah. Now, the area that you're from, you refer to Rusheenamanagh, and in America, those who have been over there, they refer to that area in different ways. Sometimes they call it Connemara, sometimes they call it Coisharga, sometimes in more modern times they call it hIarnáin, but you had a different way of referring to it.
We were the Porosh de Uirish, the parish of Myris, and that started at Roundstone, because Roundstone parish wasn't established at that stage, and it came round by Roundstone, Cashel, all of the area around Carna, up as far as Derryrush. That was Porosh de Uirish. Now Porosh de Uirish is gone. The name has changed now to Porosh de Hárna. But some people at home would always say Porosh de Uirish, Pobble Hárna. Pobble as in the community.
Public.
Pobble, yeah, the Pobble, the community of Carna. But Porosh de Uirish still would be the.
So some of the old names and traditions hang on.
Hang on, yes.
Even after they've been used before. You mentioned a couple of times your love for sailing, and I understand that it's gone on to the next generation as well. Tell us a little bit. There's all kind of different names for the sailing ships. Could you tell us what those names were, starting with the small ones and then going up to the larger ones?
Well, I suppose if I start first, the name of the boat, the traditional boats that we have at the moment, is called the Galway Hooker. No one knows where the boat came from, the actual design of the boat. Now the rig on the boat, like the three sails, that is of French origin, but the actual design, the lines or the shape of the boat, no one knows, and many have researched that, and I'd have spent a good bit of time researching it as well, the Galway Hooker. They were all over Ireland at one stage. There was a Donegal Hooker, there was a Skerries Hooker, Kinsale Hooker. Even after the famine in the early 1850s, a group of people came together here in Maine. My geography is not great now because I'm on the wrong side of the pond, and group of fishermen from the Claddagh, and they built the hooker over here, and the name of it here was, and I have drawn pictures of it taken, was Paddy's Boat. That was the name of it, or the Boston Irish Hooker. So there is still this good deal of information available on that. So that was from the Irish immigrants having left the Claddagh after the famine. And one of them was a Patrick Gannon. He was the boat builder that built the first one here. And they were building them up to about 1890s, and then they stopped building them. And they disappeared, like all timber boats. They just rot away. But sometime in the 1930s, there was some work being done on a harbour on the shore somewhere in Maine. And they discovered the skeleton, or the framework of a boat. And it was taken out, and they discovered that it was one of those Boston Irish hookers.
Oh my.
So that is here. Next time I come, I'm going to track that down and find the history of that. So they were all over. The name itself is very, very broad, because you had Baltic hookers on the continent. There was the English hooker, Portsmouth hooker. So the name is very broad, but for us then to narrow it down, the only place they have survived, the only place around the world that the hooker has survived is in Galway.
And other than the hookers, what are some of the other names for the sailing boats? That are
yeah, well, the hookers then, in that group of the hookers, there was the Boatbuilder, the big boat, which would be up to 44 feet long, from say 32 to 44 feet long. And then in the next class coming down from that would be the Yawad, half, you could translate it as half a boat, but really the term was that it carried half the load of the big boat. So it was a Yawad, carried half the load. And then you have a broad group of boats there called the Glotiog. Glotia comes from the word glotia, glotiog, pretty. And Glotiog is the one. And that's the most common and most popular class that's there now, the Glotiog. One other class was in there with the Glotiog was the Puchon. And the Puchon had a dipping lug sail. Now again, no one seems to know where did that originate from. But it came obviously from the old sailing ships to a certain degree. So there are the different categories. You have the Glotiog, and you have the Yawad, and you have the Boatbuilder, the big boat. But they're all in the hooker family, just different sizes.
And when you're saying the names, you have to be careful to get Puchon and not Punkon.
Yes.
It'd be funny to say the Punkon's Puchon, the Yankees boat.
Yeah. But I suppose they did different type of work as well, mainly for fishing for people. But then some boats were involved. There was no, as you probably are aware, there's no turf in Connemara, down the Clear Coast, Arden Islands, those places. So the boats on, say, Carrow, Lettermullen, Carna, back as far as Roundstone nearly, would supply turf to the Arden Islands and to Connemara and those places. So that's what they call the turf trade. They were involved in that. It's usually the bigger boats for the long journey. The smaller boats went from Carna into Inishmore on the Arden Islands or Inishseer and that. The other type of work they did was seaweed, especially places like into Connemara and places where there was some seaweed, but they liked the seaweed to come in, you know, more seaweed to come in. So there used to be bringing seaweed from Connemara into Galway, into the docks in Galway City. And there were two buyers there, the McDonagh's, which were in Quay Street, where if you're ever in Quay Street, and there is McDonagh's fish and chips. They originated from Carrow. They came in and they started buying seaweed from the boatmen who'd bring it in, and then they would sell it per cartload to the farmers out towards Hetford, Cardenmore, Ordenmore, all these areas. And the other lady who used to buy it was Delia Lydon, and her shop and pub was where the Keys Bar is now in Quay Street. And there was the Baldody, the boatman always said, when there were two people buying, there was good competition, there was good price.
Yes.
But then one disappeared, and then the price started going down. There was no competition then. And then of course the shops started, I'd say in the 1880s onwards, shops began to open up along the western seaboard. So to supply them with their groceries from Galway, some of the bigger boats were used to bring the cargo back to the shops in Carna and Roundstone, Cashel, Kilkerran, Russmuck, and so on and so on.
You mentioned Connemara earlier,
Yeah.
in Clare. Did you ever participate in the Cóilín Hernon?
every year.
And what was that like? First of all, what was it? And then what was it
just
like?
a Cóilín means the gathering of the boats. And it was a man that was in Connemara. He was there in 1979. He decided that he was going to have a gathering of the boats. And he left Connemara and he went back in his car to Carna and to Carrow. And he said to them, I'm going to reconstruct this whole turf trade. And the people back there told him, you're just mad. That's not going to happen. But it did happen. So he got the turf, loaded the turf on the boats in Carrow and sailed across. And the first 20 years of it was new to everybody. But now, like everything else, you know, how many years? It's 40 plus, you know, crennews now. So, but as well as that then, as bringing the turf over there, then they would have a racing regatta there for the different classes of boats. So we would always take part in it, because from Galway, we used to race down from Galway to Connemara, and then they'd have a race around the bay. But of course you'd have regattas in Kilkerran, Mason, Carna, Moynish, Roundstone, Bertrahui, Carrow, Great Man's Bay. There would be 13 or 14 or 15 regattas all around. But Connemara for us always was very much, everybody was out of their own territory. When you went back to Carna, the locals were at home there. If you went to Carrow, the locals were at home there, whereas everybody was new into Connemara, so it was a different type of competition really there. Yeah.
And when you went to the Crennew, you sailed with the Nora Bheag.
Yeah, the boat then that was I mentioned earlier that was carrying the children, the school bus that MacDonagh called it in Roundstone. I named the boat Nora Bheag because she was my mother's boat on Feenish Island, and when I was rebuilding it in 1988 in Rhinemore in Galway, I had it in at the back of the house, and I had it finished, and my parents were in one day, and she was sitting inside looking out the window at the boat outside, and she said, that's the boat that reared us. In other words, they'd be hungry days if they hadn't that boat. And then I decided, well, that's the name for the boat now. My mother was Nora, and her mother was Nora, so my mother was known as Nora Bheag, because she was, I called the boat Little Nora. Yes, that's where the name came from. Yes.
Now, Cóilín, I understand that this is your first time in Portland, but you had heard the name Portland before. What had you heard about Portland when you were in Rusheen or in Galway?
Well, Rusheen mainly now, because the people who talk about people who had emigrated, that they went to Portland. People at home seems to be very definite about where people went to. They didn't go to Boston. No, they went to Portland or they went to Pittsburgh. They seem to be, and for me now, everybody went to America, whereas that time, and a lot of the families came to Portland, because obviously what you've been showing me and explaining to me, there was work there on the docks there, what you call longshoremen at home. They would be dockers or stevedores at home. So there was work there for people to work. Yeah.
Did you know any people from Rusheen or Califinish that came to Portland?
Mainly Califinish now. I'd have heard a good deal about your family now, the Connellys, Mulkerns, Folans, Gorhams, all of those. I would have heard that a lot of those would have come to Portland. And at home then, in my earlier years in the 60s, 50s and 60s anyhow, when I remember, the only time we would hear my parents talking English at home is when we would have a visitor, mainly from America, when they would come. And that's the only time my parents would talk English. Yes. You know, then they would, I remember a cousin of my father came one time, and she came from Boston, and her grandparents came from Califinish. And when she came anyhow, she was saying to my father, you have to bring me up and show me where my ancestor came from. She said, because I want to see the castle.
Oh, yes.
So my father said, okay, we'll go up the next day. So then, after a while, he said to my mother, what am I going to do? He said, it's not a castle, he says, it's just a little stable. And this went on for a couple of days, and then my mother said to him, look, I'll bet you they'll be thrilled to see what's left of their house. Yeah. And they were. My father didn't want to bring them up. He had no castle to show them.
James Michael Curley, the mayor of Boston, used to say, not everyone's home is a castle.
It's a castle.
You know, yeah. Because the myth about everybody doing well in America was really a myth. Yeah. A lot of people did, but a lot of people suffered as well. Yeah. Especially the first generation that came. Yeah. What was it like when you heard English for the first time? Was it a very strange sensation for you?
It was really, yeah, because like I said, the radio probably wasn't well established at this stage, and we would not hear English other than a visitor coming. You know, English wasn't spoken.
And you got a little bit of English language in schools?
Yeah, we would have learned as a subject, but I mean, nowadays people learn languages in school and they're still not fluent or naturally enough. You don't get enough hours or immersion in it to have control of the language. Yeah. But it was strange, really. And I think we always found it strange. My father would do most of the talking, and always strange to hear him talking in English. You know, and I suppose we were fascinated that he could express himself so good in English. You know, and all his life he never left Carna. He was in school, national school in Carna, in 1935 when his father died. Father died from an illness, and they had a horse and cart in the house. So the neighbour were working the horse and cart for a couple of years while his father, my grandfather now, another Cóilín Hernon, was sick, and then, when his father died, he stayed at home from school and started courier, I suppose you'd call it, carriera, that's what they were called, carriera. So he would bring home turf for people, seaweed, hay, whatever work was to be done, working on road works, gravel, stones and stuff like that. So he spent his lifetime on that, and that dried up into the late 50s because tractors, you know, machinery had come in and a lot of that had changed. So he went into building then. He started building extensions and building houses for people, and that's how, as I mentioned earlier, that he was working for this man, Patrick Mulcairn's Pateen Tommy in Califinish, and that he realised that Pateen had a source of, you know, an awful lot of knowledge about local people, not so much Califinish, but outside of Califinish as well. Yeah. So,
was he ever able to do extensions onto your house as well?
Yeah, he did. He did. We had a bathroom built in 1960.
Yes.
Yeah. So he started, and then he started off working for other people. Then.
Do you remember the first time that you got a stove into the house, or when you were young, did it just have the open fireplace?
The open fire.
And how did that work? Because for most Americans, they can't conceive of cooking just on an open fire.
Open fire. Yeah, it was amazing how they could cook. I suppose that time they would have two dinners. There was a big dinner and a small dinner. So which one do you want to hear about first?
I think every time I've seen you eat, it's been a big dinner.
Big dinner. So the big dinner was bacon, cabbage and potatoes.
Oh.
So you can guess what the small dinner was. Just potatoes and cabbage. So they would manage all that on an open fire.
Yes.
You know, they could, there was a system where they could hang two pots on it, but you only had one fire really, so you'd be interchanging them back and forth so that you could keep the pot boiling, as they used to say. Yeah.
My family had the equivalent of a small dinner, and they used to call it potatoes and point because the meat was drying up in the ceiling, and so they would have the potato and cabbage, and maybe they'd take the potato and point it toward the meat. They couldn't afford to have meat at every meal. Yeah, but those are funny traditions, aren't they?
They were, yeah, but there were times that we don't know anything about. While we read about it and think about it, we didn't experience it, so we don't know really how people survived, really.
You mentioned earlier some of the names, some of the family names that are very familiar. Connolly, Folan, Flaherty, Mulcairn especially. You were out at Calvary Cemetery yesterday. What were your impressions when you looked around and saw the gravestones out there and the family names? What did you think?
I thought it was probably sad for them that they left home at a very young age. I'm sure they planned to go back. Everybody wants to go back to their native land, and that they ended up in a foreign soil. I'm sure it was, looking at the names and there. I thought it a bit weird in a way, sort of. But then cemeteries aren't like that anyhow. I do a little bit in genealogy and stuff, and anytime I go into a cemetery, I get lost there. But I would not forget to just say hello, say a prayer, address, you know, something positive. I wouldn't be going around with my rosary beads, but I would still acknowledge the people that are buried there and the life that they had spent, and what probably more than likely what they'd love to have done if they had the wherewithal to do it. And for a lot of them to go home. My father had second cousin, he was a boat builder in Calafinish, was Patrick Mulcairns, and he left home when he came out to Boston. He came and he worked on the harbour, on the longshore, and there as well. But I met his daughter. We met his daughter many years ago. We went to her when we were in Boston, 2008, I think. We went to her. She was down in Cape Cod. She was Mary O'Brien, and I remember asking her about her father and about the boat building, and she said a couple of times a year he would walk down to the seashore and he'd put his ear down to the water. Oh, he'd say, they're working on a boat back at home now in Calafinish, his brothers and that. Yes. So they never left that behind them, that they brought that with them. Wow. You know, yeah. It was,
when we were in Calafinish, when we were in Calvary yesterday, it reminded me of a time when a friend of ours in common, Sean O'Costela, was here, and he sang Our on Weensha outside of my great-grandmother's burial place because she was from Weenish. But you did something very, very touching yesterday. You said some very lovely words. Would you share, maybe if you could, some of the words in Irish that you said outside of my grandparents' and great-grandparents' grave, and then if you could give us a rough translation of that.
I had a lot to say because I was talking to a lot of them actually, a good few families there. Something along the lines, Tá sibh anseo síomhaireach, socuid, sásta, mílte bhaile ón áitear rugú agus ar tógú sibh, ach tá sibh sásta, tá sibh beag le chéile. So you're here, you're happy, you're content, you're peaceful. I know you're miles and miles away from your birthplace that you didn't want to leave, but you're all together here as well, and I hope you're happy and peaceful. That would be a rough translation of something that I would have said. And that would be common when I go into a cemetery, and yeah, you look around a lot, but still you stop at some stage and say, look, you know, you need to acknowledge what's going on here. Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful. And I think you put it exactly right. Maybe that wasn't the first place that they wanted to be. They would have stayed in Ireland if the conditions allowed it.
Allowed them, yes.
I'm sure.
Yes.
And I think that people who study immigration, they say that there's push factors, things that are pushing them out, and then there are things that are attracting them.
Yes,
if there's jobs and opportunity where they're going. And so Portland and Boston and other places allowed opportunities for them, but they certainly would have stayed. And if you see the beauty of Rusheenamanagh and Calafinish and places like that over there, if there had been work and ability for them to stay, they, I'm sure, would have.
Yeah, because they all had very small holdings. They would have an average about 10 acres. So, you know, it could only support one household. And especially when they had big families, you know, they had to do potatoes, corn, hay, then grazing for cattle and all of that. So it was a difficult for them. They were struggling really all the time. All the time, yes. I don't think we understand or have a clue as to what they went through trying to survive.
I think you're exactly right. Paroshta Wirish, right in the heart of the Gaeltacht. How's the Irish language doing today, Cóilín, in your opinion?
I suppose I'm not the best person to answer that, and maybe I am the best person to answer it because I'm outside it. I live 50 miles away in Galway City. I left home when I did my Leaving Cert in '72. But I go back there regularly to various events, like events that Michael Connolly would have on the Nimirkioch, and also the Club Shúlaid Carna. I would do walks with them. So I get a chance, and I love that they ask me to come back to do something, because it's hard when your parents are not in the homestead. It's not your place naturally, sort of your home is your home then. So when I look, I'll go back there now, I would notice how the Gaeltacht as a community is shrinking. More and more English and probably other languages now as well coming in. But then in where I live, and I have been since 1977, 78, I came to Galway, I'd say first. The Irish is very strong in the city. I mean, walking down Shop Street in Galway, you'll always hear somebody talking Irish. So I think the Gaeltacht, as they call it, the Irish community is shrinking, but the Irish language, because of Gael Scoil and all of this sort of stuff, the way it's taught. I have 2 grandchildren, and they're 6 and 7 now, and they started 2 years ago, 3 years ago in national school. And they started in an all-Irish national school for the first couple of years. And I was just wondering, I used to say a few words to them in Irish when, you know, before they went to school. And then when the eldest girl, Hayley, when she started school, when she'd come home, I'd say to her something in Irish. And I'd say then in English, well, did you learn any Irish word today? And she'd say, blah, 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 blah. That was the response. But about a month later, when I'd ask her a question, oh yeah, tá focal nuam, cahit. And now she is, the 2 of them, the 2 girls, Aoibhinn and Cóilín, they're pretty fluent. They're pretty fluent. I couldn't believe it that it would. Now, it probably helps that we talk, we don't talk Irish to them all the time, but we would keep it on their ear. We would say things in Irish, ask them or tell them that in Irish is such and such a word and so on. So I think the Irish is language in general is pretty okay. But the Gaeltacht, and I'm not so sure how do you define that or what's going to happen down the road. I don't know. I wouldn't be studying that type of thing at all as regards where the Irish is going. But that's the way I see it. Gaeltacht as a community is shrinking, but the Irish language is not shrinking.
So the Gaeltacht might be defined as a place where Irish never left, where it always was in place.
Yes.
And when you have a decline in the Gaeltacht and then people learning Irish in school, there must be a difference in the type. For example, are the traditions, the folklore, things like that being passed on? Or is it just kind of a standard type of Irish that's being taught?
Yeah, I think we're at a crossroads with all of that sort of stuff. Because sometime back in the early 60s, the Irish government or the Department of Education, whoever, they decided instead of having Donegal Irish and Kerry Irish and Ring, Waterford Irish or Galway Irish, we're going to have a standardised Irish. And I remember when we started going home from school with the standardised Irish, my mother in particular was not impressed because, for example, if you're talking about the horses, we would say Nakapul, and then Kaplia came in. So words like that were changed, and I think a lot of the native speakers did not like that. It's not that they wanted to be consulted, but I thought it was strange that somebody now was going to tell them how to speak their language that they were born and reared with. And I think a lot of people lost interest in the whole thing of the Irish. And the same thing happens now when I remember a great friend of mine, Pádraig Waldry, a linguist, I'd call him, I suppose. And I remember asking Pádraig one time about spelling. And Cóilín, he said, I do corrections and stuff. He said, I have to follow the standardised Irish. He said, but he said, people now spell it the way they say it, the way they want to spell it. He said, there is no right or wrong version or spelling for words anymore because we say them in different ways and so on. And I liked that thing, that he wasn't pushing the standardised Irish. And I think there is a whole mixture there. I'm not sure what the standard is with teachers in schools. I wouldn't be familiar now with that. You know, there's always a question mark about the standard of Irish that teachers have. It's particularly in the national school where they teach a whole lot of subjects in the national school and including Irish. Whereas in secondary school, second level schools in Ireland, there's a teacher there teaching Irish as a subject. You know, the same as a teacher's English as a subject or history or whatever. But in the national school, it's the one teacher that's teaching everything. And it is difficult for them, yeah, to get a handle on that.
Is the Pádraig de Waldry that you mentioned, is that the family of Tomás de Waldry?
Tomás de Waldry, his son, yes.
And
yeah,
maybe could you explain a little bit about what Tomás de Waldry did for the Irish language?
Yeah, well, Tomás spent all his life well, researching and gathering, and he produced a dictionary, an English-Irish dictionary, and we all have it, because when we're stuck for an Irish word, we go to Dualdry. Now there was O'Dinneen in Cork, and there was O'Donnell in Donegal, but our favourite one, of course, would be Tomás Dualdry. And Pádraig followed on. He did marine biology. He was a science teacher. Pádraig was very versatile, shall we say, and he did a lot of work. The first time I got to know Pádraig was he was working on a fish farm in Lettermullen. They were fish farming salmon, and he was known as Pádraig na Mrodán. The Brodán is the Irish word for a salmon. But Pádraig was a lifelong friend of ours now all the time, and I remember in 2012 we were invited with the Nóra Bheag to go out to an event that was organised by the Volvo Ocean Race out in Abu Dhabi. That was in Christmas 2012. And
that's a little outside the Gaeltacht, isn't
it?
A
little bit, yes. So Pádraig was the main organiser, and he came along with us. But we really got to know him there, because when things were going wrong, trying to get the boat out of a container, Pádraig would sit back and we'll get help, you know, we'll get this, and everything worked out. So we went out there at Christmas. The boat went out. It took it 9 weeks to get there. It went in a container, temperature controlled container, the Nóra Bheag. So we packed it up, put it into the container with all the gear and everything, and it went off. It was gone by early October or before that, and it went on a container from Galway to Dublin to Rotterdam, then into the Mediterranean, and we had a tracker on it, and we could track it all the way. And at one stage in the Suez Canal we lost track of it. It went off the screen, so there was panic stations, but it was back on again after a couple of hours and everything. So we flew out. All of us went out, and we had a great season, a great Christmas out there. And then when we were there, they asked us, would we stay for another few days? And I said, we'd love to stay, but our passports, everything, and our tickets tells us we're supposed to be. And one guy there, who was still very friendly with Indo Cunning, he came across the Atlantic in a little dinghy one time when he was much younger, and he said, if I sort out the tickets for you, will you stay? And I said, yes, we'll stay, and we did. So we had a great time with the boat, really out there, sailing out there, and the weather, of course, was beautiful there. Yeah.
It's amazing to think of the original person who built the Nóra Bheag, to think that it would end up halfway around the world.
Yes.
A place where many Irish people have never even thought of going to themselves.
Or heard of.
Truly amazing.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
We're getting near the end of our interview. We're a couple of minutes left now. Be remiss if we didn't talk about how you met your wonderful wife, Mary Burke. And you married in the early 1990s, I believe?
80s, I think.
1980, that's right, 1983. I wanted to knock off 10 years there. I wouldn't be forgiven for that. How did you meet Mary?
Well, I suppose like every story, it's a long story. I was teaching I did apprenticeship first with my uncle in Ballinasloe. He was a psychiatric nurse in Ballinasloe, and he got me in with the builder. So I did carpentry and joinery, then I went on to teacher training in woodwork. And I was teaching in a place called Cóilín outside Naas, and I was in the second level school, and we used to meet for lunch in the convent with the nuns, presentation nuns, every day. And of course there was all the staff in the national school, I'd say, except one or two, all of them were female. So it's from there that Mary was there. She was from Tuam, and she was teaching there, and I don't know, she probably remembers better than I how we started off.
How many children and grandchildren?
We have four children now. The eldest one is Mullin. She's married in Dublin, and she works with a law firm in Dublin, and she has a son, Spencer, and her husband, Carl Fox. And then we have Éine, second one. He has the grandchildren, the two grandchildren I was talking about. He's teaching in the school I was teaching in. He also did woodwork teaching. And then we have Caoimhe, she into the art world, as Mary was telling you about her, and film. And then Cóilín Ó, then he's into engineering now. He's working with an engineering company. He was in Australia for a while. He came back, and he's happy out. He's not in Galway at the moment. He's down in Cork working there. But he's home every weekend, and he loves his boating and his sailing. Yeah.
Well, Cóilín, and speaking of Cóilín Ó, we actually watched him on YouTube today, so you're 3,000 miles from home, but you got to see him. I can't thank you enough for your time today, and the people of Portland are very, very happy that you're here for your first visit, and we certainly are hoping that it won't be your last. Gora míle maith.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.